Florida State and Clemson, we already know that they're looking to leave the ACC. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And at this point, you would think that it's pretty much a given that they're going to end up in either the Big Ten or the SEC. But according to recent reports, the Big Ten isn't interested in Clemson and Florida State because they don't meet their academic criteria. And the SEC doesn't really have any interest in adding another Florida or Carolina school, which means that Florida State and Clemson's next best option is the Big 12. Yeah, people, according to a recent report from Ross Dellenger, Clemson and Florida State are in early conversations with the Big 12 Conference. The two ACC schools would prefer to join the Big 10 or SEC. However, the SEC isn't looking to add any more schools that are in the same state in the Big 10. They prioritize academics over everything. And I think that the Big 12 was always going to be the best move for Clemson and Florida State because, listen, I get that with conference realignment, nothing can ever be ruled out, but I don't think these conferences really want to keep adding teams because when you already do your television deal and you add new teams, that means that eventually with more teams entering the conference, when you re-up on your new television deal, there's going to be a bigger slice of the pie that everybody's not going to be able to receive when you add more teams because schools like Clemson and Florida State, when you add them to your conference, if you're the Big Ten and you have to re-up on your new deal, some of the other teams may not be in favor of having to further split up the revenue, adding more teams. A lot of these schools are really greedy. And if you're Ohio State and Michigan, yeah, Ohio State may love to play Clemson and Florida State every single year within their conference, but at the same time, do you really want to sacrifice the amount of money that you're going to get? Because right now, if you're getting $50 million, $40 million a year, and then you add Clemson and Florida State, you could end up only getting about $35 million a year because there's more faces that you have to feed. The SEC is kind of the same way. So I can get why some of these conferences are hesitant to add blue bloods like Clemson and Florida State, even though they do have the blue blood tag. And you would think that any conference would jump at the opportunity to add them because they bring in a lot of popularity and ratings. They both have massive fan bases, but the Big 12 makes more sense. Because in the Big 12, maybe you could find a way to get a little bit of that revenue going that they have, and you can get a little bit of a share in that. And also, Brent Umark, the new Big 12 commissioner, he's been making a lot of moves to get Big 12 or get the Big 12 more funding outside of just college football, whether that be, coming to a naming rights agreement with All-State, so you end up being named the All-State Big 12 Conference, or the Big 12 presented by All-State, and All-State pays you like a good sum of money for those naming rights, and you split that amongst the teams. And I think the Big 12, what they're doing is a little bit more innovative. I don't see the SEC and the Big 10 trying to get any partnerships or sponsorships going with outside college football brands. Maybe if you're Florida State and Clemson, you join the Big 12 may not be that big of a bad thing. If anything, it could be a good thing for you because you can join a conference where you don't have to worry about competing for the top every year with Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, and Michigan. If you go to the Big 12, not only does it give you an easier path to the college football playoffs, but you also are going to get more funding from making it to the playoffs because every team that makes it to the playoffs, they normally end up having an incentive and the coaching contracts that if a coach makes it to the postseason, they get like $100K bonus or something like that. So if you being in the playoffs, you're going to get some additional money from that. And then your conference also is going to be giving you a slice of things from their television deal and plus the other partnerships that they're going to be doing in the Big 12. The Big 12 has a really good commissioner. This dude, Brett Umark, he single-handedly saved the Big 12 from being extinct just like the Pac-12. You see, unlike the Pac-12, the Big 12 got on the proactive side of things. They weren't ready for things to go haywire. They just said, hey, Oklahoma and Texas are making moves. The Big Ten's making moves. We need to make a move before somebody ends up making a move on us and taking away some of our top teams. So what do? They add BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, and then they also add a couple of Pac-12 schools. If you're Florida State and Clemson, you get into the Big 12, I think that you're getting more respect in that conference than what you would if you were in the SEC or in the Big 10, because when you join the Big 10 and SEC, like, yeah, you're Florida State and Clemson, but you're not as big as a brand as what Ohio State and Michigan are. And if you go to the SEC, I mean, yeah, you're a big brand there, but you're still going to be overlooked by Texas, Georgia, Alabama. I mean, if I was Clemson and Florida State, I would rather go to the Big 12, where the Big 12, they're making good money. Not the same amount as what the Big 10 and SEC schools are, but it's way better than what you were getting in the ACC. And the thing about the Big 12 is that with how good their commissioner is, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up finding a way to make sure that these Big 12 schools get as much money as what these SEC and Big 10 schools are making. Now, most of that money probably won't come from the television deal, but it will come from, partnerships and sponsorships from outside entities, which is how I think the Big 12 is going to be able to make up for the gap in pay between them and the other conferences out there. I like Florida State and Clemson in the Big 12, because if they join the Big 12, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a domino effect. You're going to have probably Miami that is going to want to follow Florida State, and then you're going to have North Carolina that's probably going to want to get out. Virginia Tech, they could be interested. I could see Virginia going to the Big 10. Same thing with Virginia Tech. I think both of those two universities are held in pretty high regard when it comes to their academics. Same thing with North Carolina. But for Miami, I could see you going to the Big 12 too. And then the Big 12 has a good possibility of saying, you know what, if the SEC and the Big 10 don't want to own the Florida media market, we'll go ahead and own it. You got UCF, Florida State, and Miami in the same conference, and you will own Florida's media market. Tallahassee, I mean, it's Tallahassee. It ain't really nothing going on in Tallahassee really all that much. Only thing you got in Tallahassee is all of the parties that be going on for what they be doing at FAMU. You go down to Orlando. Orlando is a really highly attractive tourist attraction due to the theme parks, the amount of things that there is to do down there in Central Florida. And then Miami, I mean, it's South Beach. Who doesn't love South Beach? I remember a few spring breaks ago, I believe this was my sophomore year of college. Dog, I ran into Floyd Mayweather. Do you not know how many celebrities you can find in South Florida? Like, there are so many potential media opportunities that the Big 12 could take advantage of if they tap into that South Florida media market. I've always felt like the move for Clemson and FSU was always going to be the Big 12. Now, of course, things can change. We know that at first, it wasn't always a sure thing that Texas and Oklahoma were going to enter the SEC. But eventually, people put their egos aside and they made it happen. And they very well could do the same thing. Maybe Florida says, you know what, okay, Florida State can come. And maybe South Carolina says, you know what, F it, just go ahead at Clemson. You feel me? But going into the Big 12, I think that not only would it be beneficial from both parties, the Big 12 will add two blue bloods. They would be seen as more as just the other power conference outside of the SEC and the Big 10. Because now you add Clemson and Florida State and potentially a couple of other schools out of ACC. Now you actually got to take the Big 12 serious now. Now you really could say there is a Big 3. And plus, if you're Clemson and Florida State, you may have the benefit of maybe getting some more amenities thrown in your favor just because of the brand that you are, being in a conference that at this moment doesn't have any brands as big as what you are, at least from a popularity standpoint. Right now, the most popular team in the Big 12 is Colorado, only because of Deion Sanders. And once Deion Sanders leaves Colorado, then they're pretty much going to be irrelevant, and that's where everybody's going to be looking at Florida State and Clemson as the dudes who are going to be carrying the load for that conference. And if you can get them to join and you get Miami, maybe NC State to join, I think the Big 12 becomes a pretty formidable conference. I already think it's a pretty good conference. They got a lot of potential based off where a lot of these teams that are joining are located, especially UCF. UCF, they've moved to the Big 12 and they just have amped up everything. They are putting more money into their football program. They're upgrading their facilities. The recruiting has taken a massive leap of improvement as well. I think this past recruiting cycle, that was the best one that they've ever had in program history. So the move for Clemson and Florida State may not be the Big 10 or the SEC. We could see them playing Big 12 football whenever they decide to make their move from the ACC. Now, what does this move potentially mean for the ACC? I mean, let's just be honest. You lose Florida State and Clemson, it's over. Those are your two biggest brands. Similar to what we thought about the Big 12. We thought once the Big 12 lost Oklahoma and Texas, they were done. But they were able to find a way to suffice. And I think you could see the same thing happen if you are the ACC. If you lose Clemson and Florida State, I mean, maybe you could add a couple of G5 schools. Maybe you merge with the Mountain West or the American, but I don't think that would be enough to really make you still be seen as a legitimate power conference. I think you could stay around, but I think realistically, once you lose FSU and Clemson, you're no longer going to be viewed as a legitimate power conference anymore. Now it just would be the Power 3. And if you lose some more schools like Miami and NC State, if you can't keep them, then that's really when your conference is going to fall apart. I don't think Clemson and Florida State leaving is going to be the death blow for the ACC. I think what the death blow for the ACC will be is if you can't keep no more teams from leaving past Clemson and Florida State, then that's when things get really scary for you in terms of how long you're going to be able to stay around. But yeah, these are my thoughts on the rumors about Florida State and Clemson potentially joining the Big 12 conference.